All right, so buckle up because this deep dive is a wild ride. We're taking you into the world of Norwegian research policy.
Hmm.
Yeah, it might not sound too thrilling at first, but trust me, this one's got some crazy twists and turns.
Right.
We're talking about how a flawed study on wolves, yeah, wolves,
Okay.
ended up having these insane consequences that, get this, are still shaping how research is done in Norway today.
It all goes back, believe it or not, to this one study. It was 1947. A researcher named Rudolf Schenkel, he was observing these wolves, but here's the thing. They were in a zoo. And from his observations, he came up with this idea, this concept that would really, really stick around, the alpha male.
Okay, hold on. 1947, that's like way back. What exactly was Schenkel seeing with these zoo wolves? Like, what was it that made him decide, boom, alpha male, that's it?
So Schenkel, he was watching these wolves and noticed that the most aggressive males seemed to be in charge, like totally dominating the pack. And from that, bam, the term alpha male was born.
Wow, so this one study, this alpha male idea, it really took off. Like we were talking about how we see leadership, not just in animals, but in people, right? I mean, that's a pretty big deal.
It is a big deal, and that's part of the problem. Schenkel's conclusions, well, they weren't quite right. You see, he was looking at these wolves in a zoo, in a small enclosure. It was totally artificial, not their natural environment at all. And that kind of environment, it's like a pressure cooker, creates all this stress and tension. You don't get normal wolf behavior.
So it's like taking a peek at my family's Thanksgiving dinner, everyone's a bit stressed, and deciding that my Uncle Steve, who hogs the mashed potatoes, is the alpha of the family. Doesn't really give you the full picture, does it?
Exactly, you got it. And you know what? When researchers later studied wolves in the wild, guess what they found? The whole alpha male thing, it just crumbled. Turns out, wild wolf packs are more like families. They have a breeding care that kind of shares the leadership. They work together and they raise their pups. It's really fascinating, actually.
Okay, so no lone wolf leader, more like a wolf pack family. But hold on. We started this doc dive talking about Norwegian research policy. How does any of this connect to that?
Think of it this way. If this one study, this flawed study on wolves, if that could have such a big impact, I mean, people were talking about alpha males everywhere, right? It makes you wonder, what happens when research is misinterpreted, even with the best intentions, and it starts influencing something as important as research policy, especially in a place like Norway?
That's a really good point. This alpha male thing, it was just one study, but it had these ripple effects, changed how people saw the world.
And those ripples, they can be far-reaching. We're talking about how research funding is determined, which fields get prioritized, even how data is interpreted to make policy. It all matters.
So we've established this whole alpha male thing, not exactly accurate, but it sounds like this idea really stuck around. What happened? How did a debunked theory become so, I don't know, ingrained in our culture?
It's like, the concept kind of escaped. Even though scientists were like, hold on, this isn't the whole story with wolves, it had already gotten out there. Movies, TV, even the internet, they all glommed onto this alpha male idea.
Yeah, it's like that whole "a lie can travel the world" saying. But this wasn't just some harmless thing, right? I mean, you sent me some stuff about how this alpha male thing had some pretty messed up consequences.
Yeah, for sure. You see where this alpha male idea really took hold, like really dug in, was online, specifically with, have you ever heard of incels?
Incels, yeah, I've heard the term, but to be honest, I always kind of avoided it, It just seemed like kind of a heavy topic.
Yeah, it's definitely a heavy topic. Basically, incels, it stands for involuntary celibates, and it's a whole subculture online.
Okay, so involuntary celibates, incels. What does that have to do with the whole alpha male thing we've been talking about?
It's like they took that whole flawed idea, the alpha male, and they just cranked it up to 11. And it got all mixed up with this resentment and frustration, this feeling of being left behind.
So they're looking at this idea of the alpha male, the dominant one, and thinking, hey, if I'm not that, I'm a failure.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes this vicious cycle because they're so focused on this one very narrow definition of what makes a man successful, they end up pushing people away. And then that just feeds the resentment, the anger. It's really sad, actually.
It's incredibly disturbing because
Yeah.
it's not just online, right? We've seen how these kinds of distorted views, this incel ideology, can spill over into the real world with tragic consequences.
Absolutely. And it goes back to what we were saying about the impact of research. It might seem like a harmless study on wolves, but those misinterpretations can have a real ripple effect. And when you start thinking about something like Norwegian research policy, I mean, imagine if those same kinds of skewed views, that same kind of thinking, started influencing how research is done, how it's funded, even how it's used to make decisions.
That is a chilling thought. Because, let's face it, we've seen how quickly misinformation can spread online. But when those distortions make their way into research, into policy, that's a whole different ballgame. The stakes are so much higher.
No doubt about it. And that brings us to another twist in this whole story because, we're talking about research, we're talking about policy, and now we've got to talk about politics, specifically a politician by the name of Newt Gingrich.
Newt Gingrich, that's a name I haven't heard in a while. He was pretty big in the news a while back, right?
He was, and it turns out he was a big fan of chimpanzee research.
Chimpanzee research. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this.
So Gingrich, he was really drawn to the work of Frans de Waal, a renowned primatologist who studies chimpanzees.
Okay, chimpanzees, politics. I'm starting to see a connection here, but I'm not quite sure I like where it's going. Okay, so we've got chimpanzees, we've got Newt Gingrich. This is where it gets really interesting.
Right. So Gingrich, he was really into this primatologist, Frans de Waal. De Waal studies chimpanzees, and he's done all this fascinating work on, their social structures, how they interact, how they lead.
But Gingrich, he was a politician, right?
Right? Yeah.
Known for, well, let's just say he wasn't exactly known for his cuddly personality.
Exactly. And that's kind of the ironic part. You see, de Waal, his research, it actually focuses a lot on cooperation, on empathy, even in chimpanzee societies.
Okay, so we've got a politician known for, shall we say, his strong personality, finding inspiration in chimpanzee research. I'm sensing a bit of a disconnect here.
Yeah, you're picking up what I'm putting down. It seems like Gingrich, he zeroed in on the parts of de Waal's research that fit a certain narrative. This idea that it's all about dominance, aggression, that those are the keys to leadership.
So he kind of cherry-picked the research to fit his own worldview.
Pretty much. And, de Waal himself, he actually cautioned against this kind of oversimplification. He said, look, it's not that simple. Chimpanzee leadership, it's complex. Yes, there's aggression, but there's also strategy, alliances, even pro-social behaviors.
So it's not just about being the loudest, most aggressive one in the room.
Exactly. And there's another layer to this whole thing. De Waal, he doesn't just study chimpanzees. He's also done a lot of work with bonobos.
Bonobos, right. They're the ones known for being, well, a bit more peace-loving, right?
Exactly. Bonobos, they're fascinating. They're closely related to chimpanzees, but their societies are matriarchal.
Matriarchal. So
Yeah.
the females are in charge. That's definitely not your typical alpha male scenario.
Nope, not at all. And they're known for resolving conflicts through, well, let's just say more social interactions rather than aggression.
So we've got these two closely related species, chimpanzees and bonobos, and they show us that even within the animal kingdom, leadership isn't one size fits all. It's complex, it's nuanced, and trying to reduce it down to some kind of alpha male formula, well, it just doesn't do it justice.
And that's a really important point to remember as we think about research in general, especially when it comes to something as crucial as Norwegian research policy. Because when we start cherry-picking data, when we try to force it to fit our own biases, we lose sight of the bigger picture.
It's like we talked about at the beginning, that flawed wolf study, it had these ripple effects, changed how people thought about leadership, not just in animals, but in humans too. And if something like that could happen with wolves, just imagine what could happen if we're not careful with how we interpret and apply research in other areas, like you said, in shaping research policy in a place like Norway.
It's a reminder that we all need to be more critical, more aware of our own biases, and more willing to look at the full picture, even when it's complicated, even when it challenges what we think we know.
So the next time you come across a study, a headline, or even just a casual conversation about the science of something, remember the alpha male myth. Remember those bonobos. Because the truth is often far more complex and far more interesting than any simple explanation. And that's what makes these deep dives so fascinating. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep on learning.